Hey, how's it going? So today I'm going to be going over some jungle flavors. I have their RY4 Double, I have their Tiramisu, I have their fresh cream, I have their Cactus, and I have their Marshmallow. So one of the things that Jungle Flavors does is sort of go after more established concentrates, and so it's going to add like an extra layer to these reviews where we go back and sort of compare them to the source and figure out what's going on here. And as always, just letting you know, I did not pay for these. ECX sent them to me, so shout out to ECX. So I'm going to start off with their RY4 Double. So when you think of RY4 Double, at least as it relates to vaping, TPA's RY4 Double instantly springs to mind. And TPA's RY Double is a very, very popular concentrate. It's sort of suggested as a beginner tobacco, mostly because I don't get much tobacco out of it. I've heard it described as dirty caramel, and that's pretty much about what it is for me. You get like a really thick, heavy, kind of sticky caramel and maybe a little bit of like a dry, grassy tobacco note. But really, it's much more of a dessert than a dessert tobacco. This definitely follows suit with that. The easiest way to describe it for me, at least, would be like TPA's RY4 Double, but, you know, more. So it has that same like very heavy, kind of sticky caramel. I maybe get a little bit less vanilla to this than I do out of the TPA's RY4 Double, but that might just be that there's a little bit more going on there. Where the TPA caramel is sort of sticky and blonde, this feels a little bit darker, a little bit richer, a little bit fuller. You definitely still have that like sticky caramel, but it feels like half a shade darker, you know, like maybe it was caramelized just a little bit more. You also get a pretty distinct like brown sugar or even molasses note to that sweetness too. TPAs can be a little bit white sugary, a little bit one note. This has a little bit more depth to it, and sort of along with that heavier molasses sweetness, I do get maybe a little bit of cocoa on top of it, but it has a slight sort of raisiny fruit note. I haven't noticed it when it was actually mixed with anything, but it does sort of give you a good starting point to jump off of if you did want to make, you know, an RY4 with some actual fruit in there. So while the tobacco in TPA's version is pretty much non-existent, I would call this one mostly non-existent. I do get that same kind of like grassy, almost hay tobacco note out of this, but it feels maybe just half a step more prominent. You know, I still wouldn't go out of my way to call this like a tobacco concentrate. It definitely still feels like more of a dessert concentrate. But you do get a little bit more presence on the tobacco, and I do actually pick up something that feels a lot like sort of a tobacco leaf flavor. It could just be that cocoa in there because it does have, you know, like a little bit of a cocoa edge to it that might be subbing in for some of what I expect from a tobacco leaf. But overall, I think while the tobacco is still definitely in the back seat here, I do feel like this sells the fact that there might have been a tobacco involved at some point a little bit better than the TPA version. The throat hit here, pretty comparable to TPA's RY4. It has that really unique kind of throat hit, and I think that's where like most of the tobacco in these comes in, is just in the throat hit. There's a very like sort of dry, scratchy throat hit as opposed to something that's like more bitter and stinging in there. I wouldn't call it noticeably more harsh than TPA's, but it does definitely have a little bit of a bite to it, which honestly, if you're trying to use this for anything other than just a caramel, is probably a good thing. But yeah, concentration wise, it seems like it's maybe a little bit stronger than TPA's. I don't know. I think you could use this pretty effectively as an accent around like 2 to 3% for sort of that dirty caramel kind of sweetness to something. As a primary note, I'd probably bump it up more towards like 4 or 5%. Get a pretty full, rich, like RY4 type base out of that. And with these RY4s, you know, when I'm giving suggested percentages, and it's the same for a lot of tobaccos, they're really flexible. I've tried this up to like 6 or 8% too, and while there's nothing like harsh or chemical about it, it does just get like a little too sticky, sweet, and cloying for me. So for me, this was a really nice surprise. Actually, I think they went after TPA's RY4 Double and pretty much nailed it. There's pretty much no area in which I would not call this a better concentrate than TPA's version. So, you know, thumbs up. So next I have Jungle Flavors Cactus. So it's kind of hard to talk about a cactus flavor without mentioning Inaware's Cactus. And if I had to guess, if they were targeting this, I would think they were going after Inaware's Cactus. Inaware's Cactus is almost a magical thing. It is by far one of my favorite flavors to actually mix with. It's very deep, very juicy. Theoretically, it's supposed to be based on like an actual cactus fruit, like a prickly pear, but I don't get much out of that beyond just some of the sweetness. To me, it tastes more like a sweetened version of like aloe as opposed to the actual fruit. This doesn't really get there for me, so this is definitely more of a prickly pear rather than whatever the hell Inaware's Cactus is supposed to be. And I feel like there's a whole lot going on here. So at the beginning of the flavor, I do get like a white grape or kind of lychee sweetness to it, but then you do get something considerably more red. So actual prickly pear has been described as something like watermelon bubblegum. It's a very deep, very juicy sort of red flavor in general. What I get out of this is more like a guava, which isn't bad, works pretty well with what's going on. But I'm definitely reminded of a guava with this. So after you get past that guava, it gets interesting. If you've ever had TPA's cucumber, I think this is going to be like a very familiar kind of woody green note. Kind of tastes like a melon rind, but it has this weird kind of like high fructose corn syrup kind of clinginess to the actual flavor and the sweetness here. And really it reminds me of popsicle sticks. Like after the popsicles melted and they're just saturated with all that sugary flavor and it's kind of filmy and stuff. I'd say it has like more of a popsicle stick finish. So I think one of the things this doesn't do for me that Inaware's Cactus does, it's not a very juicy flavor. I feel like it's a little bit dry and a little bit sticky and a little bit sweet, but it doesn't really do that same like weird hella juicy thing that Inaware's Cactus does. When it comes down to it, I'd call it more of a sub for like Flavor West's Prickly Pear rather than Inaware's Cactus. Flavor West's Prickly Pear isn't necessarily a bad flavor, it tastes okay, but it is absolutely loaded with sugar syrup, which this does not have. So it is by far a better sub for prickly pear than it would be for Inaware's Cactus. So yeah, I would mix this at about 2% for an accent, maybe 3.5%, maybe 4% if you're feeling bold for like a primary flavor. In terms of what to do with it, so you could definitely fill it out as the prickly pear, and actually it's kind of cool. Inaware's Cactus at 1% with this at 3%. Really good prickly pear flavor. So if you're into prickly pears, I definitely suggest that. But it has, to me at least, maybe it's just because prickly pear isn't like the most common thing, it has a lot of commonalities with other available fruits, and so I do feel like you can kind of play off of that. You could hang more guava onto this. It would work really well with strawberries, with pears. I could even see using this as melons, sort of as a weird watermelon booster for like a candy watermelon or stuff. So overall, if their intent was sort of to go after Inaware's Cactus, this doesn't do that. It's not going to be that kind of flavor. It's not going to be, that instant additive for fruit mixes and stuff, but it's a pretty decent prickly pear flavor, so that's worth something. So next I have Jungle Flavors Marshmallow. This one, there are a whole lot of available marshmallows, so it's kind of hard to like pick the specific antecedent marshmallow for this flavor. For me though, this comes across a lot more like a cereal marshmallow. The actual vanilla here is pretty prominent. It's that very bright sort of commercial vanilla flavor that you get without too much nuance, which, is probably on profile for an actual marshmallow. There is something that feels a little malty here too, and I do get that with some of those commercial vanillas, and I think here it works pretty well with that vanilla, and it kind of makes it feel like it's covered in like crushed up cereal pieces, like it has that sort of generic cereal malt taste to it. And when you look at the texture pushes this even further towards a cereal marshmallow for me, where TPA's marshmallow is like super chewy and FA's marshmallow has, like a sort of vaguely dry flavor. This goes past that for me, and it moves into straight on like crunchy marshmallows, little tiny crunchy marshmallows, which isn't bad. I'd call it more of a cereal marshmallow flavor than anything else, but I do feel like That's where this starts to suffer for some competition. I find the vanilla here maybe just a little bit bitter, a little bit too one note. It doesn't have a whole lot of body to it, and I feel like Flavora's Marshmallow actually does the cereal marshmallow thing a little bit better than this. But overall, I mean, it's definitely a usable marshmallow flavor. If you wanted to make like your cereal milk flavors or anything like that, this is the marshmallow that I'd kind of lean towards for that. I don't think it's going to have as much use as sort of a general purpose additive like some of the other marshmallows, especially TPAs. But if you did want to build a juice around this, you know, you'll get a clear marshmallow flavor out of it. So as a cereal type marshmallow, I'd probably use this around 3%, you know, for kind of a primary flavor. Since it's a marshmallow, it's not really ever going to sit in the front of the mix. If you throw anything else bright on top of here, marshmallow is going to step back just a hair, but that vanilla is kind of chalky and dry, and so it's still going to like stay up there in the mix. I do feel like you could use this as an accent, maybe around 1.5%, 1%. If you needed like some dry sweetness, sort of treating it more like a meringue for a sweetener rather than, you know, like TPA's marshmallow. Feel like it would work pretty well in bakeries in general or some of those more dry textured applications. Next up, I have Jungle Flavors Tiramisu. So the big tiramisu competition, as far as I know, would be Flavor Arts. And Flavor Arts Tiramisu has quite a bit of traction. You see it used a lot for just a coffee flavor, but for me, there's a lot more going on there. There's some drier bakery, but there's also a whole lot of sort of eggy cream in the Flavor Art version that doesn't really mesh with me in terms of like what I'd expect. It's sort of a custard flavor on top of an espresso flavor. This is definitely still a coffee forward flavor. I do get that sort of like darker espresso note from here, and there is some kind of like cocoa too, which kind of just makes the entire thing feel darker. Flavor Arts espresso flavors are sort of well renowned for having that weird burnt popcorn coffee note that theoretically you can just, you know, go way under on percentage and try to avoid most of that, but you don't actually get much coffee flavor. This is less skunky than that. I do feel like it has some of that same kind of vibe, but if you're going to be like talking on the coffee weirdness scale, I'd put like Flavor Arts Dark Bean at like a 9 or 10. Flavor Arts Booster or Tiramisu at like a solid 7. This is probably around a 4. So it has that darker espresso roast to it. I think it still sells coffee pretty well, but it doesn't have that same level of like completely incinerated burnt popcorn thing going on. So tiramisu, theoretically a full dessert, right? You got the espresso, you have like lady fingers, and then you have some sort of cream component. This doesn't really do a cream component for me, which I guess is the biggest difference with Flavor Arts. I don't really get anything creamy out of this. I do get, however, like a sort of drier, textured ladyfinger sort of flavor. It's that sort of neutral bakery texture, maybe a little bit crunchy, not super highly flavored, but you feel like that sort of neutral bakery base is going to be an asset when you're actually trying to mix with this. So if you did want to make like a coffee dessert, this isn't ridiculously sweet. You know, it does that darker coffee thing fairly well. And with that sort of ladyfinger base, you can hang more bakery notes off this without worrying about the entire thing getting swamped by that sort of eggy, rich cream. You can go ahead and add your own cream in, which I prefer, but I'm not a big fan of the cream note in Flavor Arts version. I will say this does seem a little bit tart for me. It doesn't really fit in the profile. At lower percentages, it seems to fill in a little bit as you start cranking it up. So, I mean, if you're going to use this, I'd be ready to deal with that relatively bold coffee flavor. But I'd use this around 1.5% as an accent, maybe up to 3% as a primary note. You're going to get a lot of coffee at that 3%, but, you know, if you're willing to make some concessions to how hard it is to do a dark coffee that doesn't taste horrible, this is actually a pretty solid choice for that kind of tiramisu flavor. Last for today, I have their fresh cream. So Flavor Arts Fresh Cream is a big deal for a good reason. It's probably one of the most widely available, non-terrible sort of lighter, almost milk type flavors that you can use in a juice. There's nothing weird or butyric in it. I may just be an uneducated slob with a wooden dead palate, but this tastes almost identical to Flavor Art's Fresh Cream to me. This is a medium heavy flavor, but it reads to me a little bit more like whole milk as opposed to actual cream, but I think that's just kind of putting it in perspective where some of the other cream flavors are. There are some sort of richer buttery notes here, but it has a very like kind of moderate mouthfeel. It's very flat, mildly sweet, a little bit of butter, but it doesn't have anything like weird or butyric or vomity to it. And it also doesn't have that like fluffed whipped cream texture like a lot of the other available creams. Like I said, picking out the differences here between this and Flavor Art's Fresh Cream. If you put them in a lineup, I probably couldn't tell the two apart. It does seem like Flavor Art's Fresh Cream is maybe a hair more concentrated, but it's kind of hard to tell because there's really not much going on the top note, so you don't get any like really bright flavors to latch on to. So you're basically comparing like how creamy is that mouthfeel, and they're definitely playing in the same league. Most of the flavor differences that I got when tasting the two side by side, I felt like the Flavor Art was maybe just a half step richer. But, you know, honestly, that could all just be down to the fact that I've had my bottle of Flavor Art's Fresh Cream for like 9 months and the stuff is fresh. So I'd call it a functionally identical substitute for Flavor Art's Fresh Cream. So if you're watching this, you probably don't need me to tell you how to use fresh cream flavor since it's pretty much on par with Flavor Art's. You want to use it where you want a milk note that doesn't taste like it's already been regurgitated by somebody. This doesn't have that like butyric note to it. It's just a nice neutral fresh cream. You can use it in a whole bunch of stuff. Little bits are good at like softening up flavors that are a little bit too hard without pulling the entire profile into, you know, like soaked in milk territory. But usage percentage here is going to be pretty much in line with Flavor Arts. I'd probably go up to at least 1%, but I've never been the type of person who thought that 0.25% fresh cream in anything actually made a difference. So, you know, maybe 1.5% as an accent, 3% for a little bit more of that cream effect. Since there isn't much going on in the top notes here and it's a very flat flavor, it's never really going to stand at the front of your mix. So it's basically how soft you want that mix. You aren't going to be able to push this on top of other flavors. But overall, very workable alternative to Flavor Art's Fresh Cream. Yeah, I hope that was helpful if you were looking at any of these flavors. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. I will catch you later.